Good afternoon and welcome to Round the Table with Christian Concern this Friday lunchtime. It's great to have you. Good to see you on Facebook or YouTube. Do get your comments and questions in on the comment sections there and we will try and answer them. Today we're looking at the subject of abortion and we've got special guests today, Esther Hacking and Regan King, who run specialist ministries around the area of abortion, which we'd like to hear about and let them talk about. I've also got Andrea Williams, Chief Executive of Christian Concern, on the line as well. Good afternoon to you all. How are you doing?
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having us.
Great. It's nice to see you. Esther, let's start with you, because you have run a ministry called Her Truth. Tell us about that. What is that ministry?
Yeah, so Her Truth is, in a nutshell, about, well, I guess with abortion, we associate it with so many words like empowering and good for women and free is freedom. And so Her Truth is basically telling stories about women that have had abortions firsthand or conceived through rape or risk their lives even to carry their own baby, to give a different perspective of what everyone else is saying about, you know, how good it is and empowering, to actually hear it from the people that have been through it.
Wow. So how do we get to see these stories? Maybe our colleagues can put a link up. There's a Facebook page, is there? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so we do interviews and we release little trailers, snippets to just give a taster of what these women want to say, or men, because men are affected by abortion too.
Right. And it's video clips of people telling the story of what it's really like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. On YouTube, we do the full interview, which is about 20 to 30 minutes.
Right. And how many testimonies have you got?
We've got, I only aired about 5 or 6, but we've got a compilation and we're starting season 2 very soon, which will hopefully be in a studio setting, which is exciting. There's lots of people that have contacted us and want to share their stories, which is really exciting.
Oh, great. Because this is really important to get the stories out, isn't it? So give us an example of one of the stories. Just talk us through like the kind of things that you're hearing or you've got on these videos.
Oh man, so the women that I've spoke to and men just have kept me awake at night. They're just incredible, such brave people. But lots of different ones come to mind. A very brave person called Paula, who was gang raped actually at gunpoint, and she conceived her gorgeous son, who's called Caleb, and she now runs a Hope After Rape Conception Centre. And she's extremely brave. Her church told her repeatedly to abort her baby, that it would be devil's spawn, that he would turn into a rapist himself. Her story is amazing, and she persevered, and now she has him. He's about 3 or 4, and he's just incredible. You can see the love that she has for him, and she talks openly about, you know, how he's not a reminder of rape. He's a reminder of God's love, and that persevering, you know, just brings the best gift. The first time that she smiled since the rape was when she found out she was pregnant, which is just amazing.
Wow. Andrea, talk to us about the importance of these stories.
Well, it's really important because they're not heard, and the rhetoric of this abortion industry is that abortion is all about a woman's choice, that it's empowering, that it's freeing. These terrible situations are the kind they use these hard cases make bad law to say that we must keep this at all costs. We must keep on liberalising, keep on increasing access to abortion. But in fact, when we hear the story of Laura and of Caleb, then we hear the story of hope, actually from something just about the worst conceivable circumstance in which you can imagine conceiving a child, the kind of circumstance that is continually put out there as to why abortion must be kept legal and keep on being liberalised, is turned around. Of course, we believe that those that committed such a terrible crime on that brave woman, of course, we believe that they should be brought to justice.
Yeah.
But we do not believe that the answer, justice is not killing the innocent child that was conceived as a result of a brutal act. Because that child, as we see now, Caleb is 4 years old, and Caleb is life and brings healing and brings hope. And imagine this woman, Laura, imagine had she...
Paula, yeah.
Sorry, so what's the name?
Paula.
Paula. Imagine had Paula then had the abortion, and not, that would have then put another real bad hurt into her life. And then she would, 3 or 4 years later, she would be trying to come to grips with the brutality of a rape, followed actually by the brutality of an abortion after that. Because imagine also how she would have been physically after a rape. You know, the trauma of a woman. So these sorts of things we need to hear. And I presume, Esther, is Paula one of the stories in your first series? If we
yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, the trailer's up there.
Wonderful. I hope that those that are viewing will watch that. Yeah.
And Esther, tell us, because it's not heard this story about it affecting men, right? You mentioned that.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So this very brave guy that we've interviewed, he paid for his ex-girlfriend's abortion 20 years ago, and absolutely thought nothing of it until decades later. And he had a very, very graphic dream. And in this dream, he did something horrific to this baby. He stabbed this baby in the chest, and it was just very, very graphic. And he woke up and he was horrified that he wasn't horrified in the dream. He was more horrified that he didn't feel anything. And suddenly it just opened up this massive world to him that he wasn't really aware of. And he started reconsidering abortion and what he had done with his girlfriend, and just the impact that had. And now he's very pro-life, and, you know, is also fighting for the unborn. An incredible guy. So it's just amazing what can spark someone just feeling totally different, you know?
Yeah, I know someone myself who feels the guilt of abortion, a guy as well, you know, and these stories aren't really told, are they? You know, and then the other guys who feel, you know, not so much the guilt because it wasn't their decision, it was the partner's decision, but they still feel the loss. They grieve over that child. You know, it's that.
That's why I love the fact that Regan's, you know, like heading up this pregnancy crisis line, because I love the fact, and I know that Esther's husband, Christian, is this powerful advocate for the unborn children and for women, you know, in these situations. And I think that, you know, there's again this rhetoric of the industry that we have to break down. Of this is a women's issue. It's a woman's right. Well, there's a man involved and there's a child involved, and very often the men have not taken the place that they should in the situation, or honoured the women or their unborn children. But they need help. They need a voice too. You know, they need a voice too. They need to be considered in these situations.
Yeah. So Regan, tell us, because you run a pregnancy crisis helpline, which is so important and so valuable. Tell us about it, Regan.
Yes, thank you for having me on. And might I say, Esther, that powerful stories that can definitely relate to through the calls that we receive. Pregnancy Crisis Helpline was actually launched as a joint endeavor between Christian Concern and Pro-Life Alliance a couple of years ago. And after a soft launch, Pregnancy Crisis Helpline began to formulate as its own independent charity. We have that now. We are there for both men and women who call us in any crisis situation. Most people do call us either looking for an abortion or considering having an abortion. We receive many calls of people who are post-abortive, so many calls of people in distress who are heartbroken by the loss of their child. In the time of lockdown, we saw an increase in calls. We went from having over 500 minutes of calls in May to having over 800 minutes of calls in July. And we went from having next to no chats in May to having over 30 in August. So we're looking at an increase of people who are really looking for answers. Quite a few of those people would have been post-abortive, and without exception, the people who call us who are post-abortive wish they could go back, wish they could turn back the clock, and wish that that wouldn't be a decision they would have made. On the note of men who regret involvement in an abortion, we deal with so many men who call us, their relationship destroyed, some initially supporting the abortion, thinking this is what's going to keep the relationship intact and together, and then it doesn't happen. And then they are left without relationship, without child, a lot of heartache on different angles. Our goal is to provide a listening ear and clear, compassionate counsel that provides people with alternatives.
What's the website, Regan? What's the website for that?
It's pregnancycrisishelpline.org.uk.
Okay, great. And that's really interesting. You get men as well as women calling it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's something.
Sorry, Regan, you continue.
It's something that not everyone would expect. Tragically, we have some men who call us who we're convinced are arranging the abortion, pressuring the woman. And so when we become convinced of that immediately, you know, it's a case of, well, we can't speak to you about this. We have to speak to your partner or girlfriend or wife. And sometimes they're willing, sometimes they're not willing. Other men call us and they are genuinely concerned about some other crisis. It might be a maternity rights issue. It might be a paternity rights issue. During COVID, a lot of people calling us related to work-related anxiety that was attached to their pregnancy, men and women included. So that was a unique angle that we hadn't really dealt with until this season. And then we have those men who call distraught that their child was aborted.
Wow. And how do you help them?
So we provide a service where initially we listen to and seek to assess the situation. What exactly are they going through? Is this a situation where they're very sold on having an abortion? What can we do to bring truth into that? What can we do to help them think through more clearly the situation that they're getting into? In other cases, when we have someone who calls who's post-abortive, we listen to them for as long as they need to talk before, following up, assessing in counseling sort of capacity. In some cases, we refer on to other services that are near them that can help them. That includes churches or Christian counsel individuals. Also PACE, we've referred people to post-abortion support for everyone, and just essentially trying to find people the help that they need that's closest to where they are.
Very good. Yeah, very good. And roughly how many calls, how many individuals have you helped, do you know?
So it's phenomenal. In the first year, we advertised on using Google Ads in a very limited capacity, only focusing on London. We had over 1,000 calls in that year, and we see now that that's increasing. We have well over 1,000 calls now. If we look at the amount of calls we receive per month, it's well over 100, pushing up towards 150 calls per month. We need volunteers. We need that resource to continue to do that. But it's an important service, and anyone who calls us and is willing to share their story and is willing to listen, we're confident that we can provide them with meaningful help.
Fantastic. And what about the home abortions during the lockdown? How has that affected your helpline, or have you heard stories about that as well?
We definitely have heard many stories related to that. And indeed, it's been a privilege to refer one lady who was looking at potential legal challenge onto Christian Legal Center a couple of months ago now. You look at the statistics, they are available on Mary Stopes' website. Obviously, the entire abortion statistics won't be released for this year until next year, but they already do have statistics for abortions procured during COVID-19, and the amounts that are published on Mary Stopes' website, we're looking at plus upwards, well over 20,000 of the abortions this year were essentially DIY abortions.
Let's just think of the DIY abortions. Let's just think what it really means. We've seen some of those images of packages arriving by posts, really sometimes scruffy packages with these 2 pills, with women alone. You know, this is not care for women. You know, this is women aborting, you know, bleeding in their bathrooms alone, very often in situations of panic, situations of crisis,
Pain.
often alone, and then, you know, and then crying, calling out to organizations such as the Pregnancy Crisis Helpline, often when it's just, sadly, just too late. These are for every that, all those statistics that Regan has mentioned, those are lives. Those are lives. It's the woman, it's the unborn child, it's the father, it's extended family. These things are real. And when we think about this kind of national lockdown that we currently have, and the fact that these DIY abortion has been made possible because of it was something the abortion industry wanted, but that the numbers for abortion during this period are higher than deaths by COVID. We've got a sort of serious morally critical crisis on our hands in the nation. It's a spiritual crisis, it's a moral crisis, but it is real. Esther, I think we found behind the scenes here your mashup in terms of the Her Truth, and I think it would be great to play that, don't you?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Great, let's do that. Can we do that, folks? That sounds good.
In March of 2009, I had the abortion.
20 years ago, I paid for an abortion with an ex-girlfriend.
The abortions that I didn't know were eating away at me and that I was grieving. I was stuck in denial for decades.
I was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, which is extra fluid on the brain. And they had told me that I was going to need emergency brain surgery. And that was when they then discovered that the child that I was carrying, that she had then a 20 to 30% survival chance.
He and his roommate set me up, and the 2 of them gang raped me at gunpoint.
Everything in my world just completely shook and crumbled.
I just felt super broken and disgusting, and like I would never be valuable again in my life.
At the time, having an abortion was really nothing more than going for a tooth extraction. That's how I viewed it.
And what made you change your mind about this procedure being a tooth extraction to the taking of an actual life?
I had a graphic dream. What horrified me was the fact that I wasn't horrified. It was the fact that I could carve up a baby like that and I didn't feel anything.
And when you look at this up and when you actually see what happens to that baby, immediately I was like, there's no way am I going to allow anybody to do that to any child of mine.
The fear and the pressure, that was really what kind of pushed me to decide to follow through with an abortion.
You know, they would call themselves, all of them would say that they're pro-choice, but they never respected the quote-unquote choice that I made.
But nobody was telling me, you know, all right, well then, if that's okay, if you can just remove my fetus, and you know, who's going to help me deal with the emotional impact of the fact that I have just consigned my child to death?
It seems like the dream answer to your problems. A little bit like when you're in debt and somebody offers you a loan. The relief is immense, but you've got to pay that loan back. And I paid it back through years of bad relationships. I paid it back through bulimia, self-harm, through drugs and drink and just shocking behaviour. And in the end, I had to look at it for what it really was.
When we decided to have the abortion, my boyfriend made the appointment and he didn't go with me because he was working and was unable. And they told me that I was 8 weeks pregnant. And so they told me that the best option for me was doing a abortion pill. I had to grab like the hand towel and just like bite on it and to keep from screaming because it was just so painful.
Well, the only way I can describe it is white light. What he had actually done that day was he sucked the life out of me as well.
There was blood like kind of everywhere on the floor once I got up, and they told me that the pill was unsuccessful, that there was quite a few parts of my baby still in me, and that I would have to go to an emergency D&C. Everything was bad after that.
Gosh, I can't think of anything worse for women to be going through behind closed doors right now.
Dealing with those people was easily 1,000 times worse than being gang raped.
I had to go through a journey to deconstruct my thinking on this particular issue. The reality is, life is difficult, isn't it? And that's what helps to mold us and develop us into the humans that we're going to be.
I feel like I definitely was not informed properly.
People constantly said that all he would ever be is a reminder of the rape and that I would never be able to love him because I was a rape victim. You know, none of that's true. He is a reminder every single day, but not of rape. He's a reminder that God, his love is bigger than anything in this world. Never had any issues bonding. I love that child with every ounce of my being, and he's incredible.
See, as soon as I held her, I just knew it was worth it, and it was worth it. Abortion doesn't solve anything. Anybody that I know who has come through an abortion has been left really traumatized.
And it's not that I want to take the choice from anyone. It's the fact that I want to inform people of what the truth is, because I wouldn't wish this upon my worst enemy.
Therapeutic. It'll make you feel better. Well, that doctor needs to come to Rachel's Vineyard and see how many people feel, you know, that this is therapeutic.
Wow, hard-hitting stuff there. Esther. Well done, making that. And that's a compilation of clips, is it, from all the interviews, full interviews of each of those people? Is that right?
Yeah, so that's from season 1. And they, like I said, I'm just so grateful that they were brave enough to come forward with those stories, because they're just so necessary. And we're claiming that we know what's best for women, and we obviously don't at all.
Yeah, and it is hard hitting, isn't it? And that's the thing. People think it's just a tooth extraction or equivalent to that. And then they come away with all the guilt and shame and all of these other things. And that's part of why people don't tell the stories, isn't it, Andrea?
It is, but the shift I see at this current time in this season is, whilst in a sense the industry is getting more and more brazen and is advancing through the institutions and kind of dismantling the abortion act, what we're also seeing with so many stories coming through, people beginning to tell the story. So the reality of the impact of abortion is coming through. So those stories that Esther has put together in her truth, if we imagine that there were how many stories were there? 4 or 5?
Yeah, about
5, yes. If you imagine all the numbers that Regan has spoken about, every one of them could be telling such a story. Isn't that right, Regan?
Yeah.
And you know, it's the same for us here. We hear so many stories, and I'm 55, and there are many women who I know to this day who keep their abortion secret from those that they love, from all sorts of people. I also know of children that were born in difficult circumstances who are now perhaps 30 years of age. This is the other thing, during those kind of some of those teen university years, I just, when I think about some of the decisions that some young women made that were my exact contemporaries in those years as well.
So listen, I want to just quote this from Malika Miriam on Facebook. In my line of work, I've witnessed the abortion pill being given to women for any reason at all, as if it was a mere paracetamol. The nurse is so nonplussed. Ladies sent home with the pills. You'll bleed, but it'll be fine. The pregnancy will pass, will be fine. Denial of humanity of the unborn makes it very easy for us to be murdered. God, please intervene. I mean, wow, it is shocking, isn't it? The extent to which people do view it as just, a simple thing that with very little consequences when it really isn't. Regan, have you got any success stories you can tell us about where people have changed their minds on the back of calling your line there?
Absolutely. We've had in the past month 6 stories of people who have said, actually, we're going to keep our child. So that's been phenomenal. Back in the summer, there was someone who contacted, and it was a difficult situation throughout the whole COVID lockdown. Concern over job, concern over future finance, the relationship situations. Many of the people who contact us aren't ideal. In some cases, there is no relationship. In some cases, people don't even know who might be the father. And this was a complicated situation where we just had to say, okay, take a piece of paper, and you're saying a lot. It sounds like you're uncertain about having an abortion. Let's actually compartmentalize this. Let's look at the real challenges that you're facing, and let's look at solutions. And I said, draw a line down the piece of paper, and let's look at the pros of keeping the child. And over here, let's look at some perceived cons. And there was a list of about 10 pros. There was support from the family. There was already support from friends, people she had told about it, were excited and were actually encouraging her to keep the child. There were only 1 or 2 potential cons, and they were all hypotheticals. She was still conflicted. And so at the end of it, we drew things to a close, and I encouraged her to continue giving it some thought and would follow up. A lot of the calls that we receive are initial. There is, in many cases, follow up afterwards. And I was very, very thrilled to make contact again and hear that since the conversation we had, she had chosen to continue with the pregnancy and was thrilled and had peace in doing so. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. And you said 6 in the last month alone.
Yes,
where people have called you thinking about having an abortion and decided not to. Partly as a result of calling you and the advice taken on your helpline. Yeah.
Our volunteers are phenomenal. We do train them. We go through our protocols and guidelines. And so in this past month, to have 6 people completely turn around or make the choice that they're going to keep their child when they've been uncertain about it has been really phenomenal and an encouragement.
Fantastic. Well done. Well, I think that's great ministry, Regan. Encourage people to support you, and if people are able to volunteer, what do they have to do to volunteer, Regan?
It would be really helpful if you want to volunteer or support in any way to send an email to info@pregnancycrisishelpline.org.uk. That's info@pregnancycrisishelpline.org.uk.
And can they say, what, I can give an hour a week or 2 hours a week or something like that? Or
Absolutely. Contact me. Let me know what you can do. Let me know some of your skill set. Send me, most of the time, we'll have people send in their CVs so we get a sort of idea of what their skill set is. And then we'll set up some time for training, and we'll go from there.
Brilliant. Yeah.
I think it'd be great if there are others with stories, the kind of stories that we've heard that kind of compilations that Esther is putting together. These are powerful to have in the public domain as well. So to contact Esther at Her Truth, so that we can get more and more of these stories told, keep them coming, keep on telling the stories, getting them into the public domain, so that we will see lives saved. We will change the public discourse. It's amazing to know, part of the way of doing it is information. That's what Esther is providing, the reality of abortion or choosing a different road. And Regan, to know of those lives saved is absolutely fantastic, isn't it? Fantastic.
It is, yeah, great. Listen, thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate what you're doing. It's really great stuff. We're going to go on and talk about some lockdown issues now. Esther, I think, thank you for what you've been saying and very much for what you're doing. And I hope many people see those videos and watch the testimonies. But I think you're going to leave us now.
Thanks so much. Bye, guys.
And it's been great having you on. Yeah, thank you. So, Andrea, let me start with you. So we're moving back into more and more lockdown measures, it seems, aren't we, across the country at the moment. And the latest one is Wales, which from 6 p.m. tonight, I think, is that right, goes into a firebreaker lockdown, which includes closing churches for 3 Sundays, and even supermarkets can only serve essential food, I understand. Andrea, tell us about this.
Well, the idea that churches are going to be closed, they say initially for 3 weeks, but we don't know what happens after 3 weeks. Churches that are open, that provide the most essential service, in fact, refreshment, revival for the soul, physically, mentally, spiritually. The idea that we are being forced to close down when we should be the lighthouses and the lighthouses and the beacons of hope at the hearts of our community. Of course, not reckless, but open, radically open to serve and to minister to the needs of our community. Forcible closure is very serious indeed, something that absolutely needs to be challenged, because this is how freedom is fettered, and our freedom to continue to regulate and be who we are, and actually to preach the whole counsel of the Word of God, to be the church. When the government can control what the church is, how we open, how we close, how we do worship, how many we can have, that becomes a very serious issue indeed that needs to be challenged.
Yeah, and Regan, tell us about your church, because you run a church, don't you? And how did it work in lockdown, and how's it affecting, or did affect? And just talk to us about it.
Yes, I pastor the Angel Church, which is in Islington, North London. When we first heard that we needed to go into lockdown, there was obvious disappointment. We believed at the time that, we had 3 weeks. We were told 3 weeks to stop the virus, 3 weeks to flatten
the curve.
3 weeks to flatten the curve. Yes. And here we are still talking about it, however many months later. At the time, we believed it was right and it was proper to take a step back, and as grieving as it was, to say we're going to submit to this and pray that this will indeed be effective and that it will cause real change. Well, obviously, within 3 weeks, there was no change really in regards to the restrictions, particularly on churches. So right at the beginning of that time, already thinking through the reality that the church remains essential. It never lost that place of being essential to society. It's just as essential, one might say, more essential even than the local supermarket. Just as we need our physical strength and health from food, we need the spiritual strength and health from food. Jesus says, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, give to God the things that are God's. The church has never belonged to Caesar. The church has never belonged to the government. So while as we should behave in a submissive way to the government and with respect, at the same time, we have to seriously consider that those calls we see in Romans 13 and 1 Peter chapter 2 particularly are speaking in a context where people would have been inclined to zealotry, which was essentially terrorism. They would have been inclined to potentially anarchy, insurrection, or achieving their ends by violent means, or perhaps by withholding taxes. So that's the context of those passages. It's not calling, those passages do not call for total obedience. Indeed, the early church met illegally. So we began to look at what we could do. We, in the time that's elapsed since all of this started, have seen over 10,000 meals provided to local vulnerable, isolating, sheltering people.
10,000.
Over 10,000, yes. And that's been done out of our church building. We've had restaurants donate meals. Early on, we were doing that, but then we started cooking meals ourselves with a team of volunteers from the church and a local community group, and joined forces in such a way that has had a very powerful effect. We began having church prayer meetings in June to pray for an end to this and to really prepare people for the reality that should we not be allowed to meet again, we believe that it was right to regather, not in any reckless way, but in a way that valued our call under God to gather and encourage one another, and that recognized first and foremost love for God and love for neighbor walk hand in hand. The spiritual provision of the church walks hand in hand with the physical well-being of our society. And so July, we resumed meeting. We had a baptism on the 5th of July, which was an immense encouragement. And since that time, we've known only growth. The church is a small church, but had a meeting last night, and we're adding multiple new members in the coming days. People who have come along, many of them very new believers in Christ. And so my challenge really to other churches, my challenge to any who may be tuning in from Wales, is to look with your church at what can be done in this time, and to assess, okay, what if these restrictions continue to come? Will we have a time when we actually recognize, submit to God over man?
Yeah. And there are real issues here, aren't there? Because I mean, I actually spoke at an Affinity conference earlier this week. I think we just put a link up on that about coronavirus. But there are real issues about independence of church and state, Andrea, freedom of religion as well, duty of Christian ministers to serve God, sometimes over man if that's required. And spiritual life is more important than physical life. And Jesus said, if you want to save your life, you'll lose it. You know, all these issues are raised by this, aren't they, Andrea?
Of course they are. And, you know, as the church, are we passionate about people's eternal souls? I mean, society is being subdued because of a fear of a virus, which is actually a fear of death. When Jesus Christ himself overcame death, he is light and he is life. And in him, we have eternal life. We can point people to that hope. And, you know, this feeding of 10,000, literally the feeding of 10,000 in Islington, in London, the church growing. Why? Because there is not just physical food, but the hope of eternity, something that goes beyond this current situation. So that's why it's vital. That's why it's vital.
And of course, we challenged the lockdown, didn't we, Andrea, with 25 church leaders back in May. And do you want to talk about that as well?
Well, it was vital. It was absolutely vital to challenge what the government was doing, because they misunderstood the kind of things that Regan's been saying, and the importance of the independence of the church, and the importance of the church to have its ability to be able to run itself, not to be interfered with by the state. Once the state can begin to interfere in this way, then it can actually begin to interfere in terms of what our doctrine is. The new rustling that we have around the banning of so-called gay conversion therapy. Well, that becomes the banning of conversion therapy. What is the banning of conversion therapy? It's about banning things which society may approve of, but actually which are sinful. Those things become prohibited by the state. The teaching, the pointing people away from them becomes prohibited by the state. It's actually church encroachment upon what a church says, how a church governs. These things are monumentally important and need to be challenged now in Wales, just as they've been challenged in England. And of course,
the government did promise not to close churches again, didn't they?
They did, but
as a result of,
here we are in Wales. They don't seem to have got that message, and that's why it's important to be.
And we've got a question here from Paul Brown on YouTube, who says the crux of the argument within the church between obeying the state and disobedience is about the church not being specifically targeted by these measures. Do you want to talk about that, maybe, Andrea?
The crux of the argument within the church between those who champion obedience to state but against disobedience seems to be around the church not being specifically targeted by these measures. Well, the initial lockdown would have meant that there was criminal sanction if the church opened. That was very serious indeed, and of course needed to be challenged. Essentially what we've seen in terms of church compliance, and what we're dealing with hundreds of calls here at the Christian Legal Centre in the past months, is what do the guidelines mean? And a little bit as Regan has said, we work with the guidelines, we work with the grain as much as we can. We work out what it is that we can do. But at the end of the day, where government guidelines are merely guidelines, they are that. And if we considered the guidelines and put our own protocols and practices in place in order to ensure that we are not reckless, then we should remain as open as we can possibly be.
Yeah, and it's about the importance of church ministry, isn't it? Because it's like, off licenses were allowed to open and churches face criminal sanctions. And I think the same thing is going to apply in this firebreaker lockdown in Wales. They're allowing off licenses to remain open while saying, possible criminal sanctions for churches opening. Regan, do you have more you want to say about this, the pastoral effect perhaps of churches not meeting?
Yes, in this time I have seen very definitely a decline locally in people's mental health and well-being. It's interesting that for a society that is constantly talking about considering other people's mental health and well-being, we're participating in actions that are provenly detrimental to people's mental health and well-being. I have met and seen and ministered to people on the verge of psychosis who were in perfectly healthy places prior to lockdown. I've known people who have attempted suicide. I have seen people, friends, people I know who know of other people, young and old, who have committed suicide. So the pastoral needs are severe. I've seen locally there has been, and this is nationally proven in statistics as well, an increase in alcoholism and just general poor health, obesity, and other things as a result of an enforced sedentary lifestyle. And all of these things create very complex pastoral issues, because once churches are open, it all comes back in. Now, one thing that we've been doing is as things began to ease and people began to be out and about a little bit more, I would say from about May, June time, we had the doors fully open to receive people who were homeless or on the verge or just incredibly isolated into the building, and they would collect the food that we'd prepared, and they in many cases would stay and eat inside, and that provided an outlet for conversation. And it was interesting to see the openness of these people to spiritual conversation, people being awakened to their spiritual need. It's to a point now that 3 times a week, we have over 30 people who come inside our building and pick up their food, and many of them stay and eat. Twice a week, at least 30 people are with us and will listen to a gospel message that I deliver. If I don't walk up into the room, by a particular time, I'm often approached by at least 2 or 3 of these individuals and say, Regan, are you going to give us a message today? These are people who prior to lockdown wouldn't have given the scriptures the time of day. They wouldn't have given God's word any attention. They certainly wouldn't have engaged in conversation of this sort with me, but they're keen, they're eager, sometimes they're tearful. They know that there's something more to life than this. And in the words of one elderly man who's 80, who comes and picks it up, he said, you have given us hope. You went against what everyone else was doing and had your doors open to us. And we thank you for that. That's my encouragement to others as well. Look at what you can do. Lead your churches to open in that way.
Brilliant. Fantastic ministry, Regan. Really love it. It's really valuable stuff that you're doing there. Andrea, do you want to make a closing comment perhaps about all this?
Well, we've heard about the things that can be done, you know, from our church buildings. The reality is this, I think, that church online, and you know, it's great that we've learned to communicate in this way, and that's wonderful. But I sometimes think it can be the preserve of those that are really well, or preserve the middle classes. We'll have a nice cup of coffee. We'll sit down and watch this on a nice sofa. And you know, the church is there for those that are comfortable. But the church
when it suits me as well, rather than church, you know. Yeah.
But you know, the thing about it all is this: is that it is the isolation is devastating. And I think even for people that have, well, as Regan alluded to there, you know, mentally well before, this isolation, particularly amongst young people who are working from home continually, is really, it's difficult. And we need to provide a place where we are physically open. But as well as that, you know, just as Regan has alluded to there, or has demonstrated, just imagine an angel church in every community, open everywhere. Imagine the 30 plus the 30 plus the 30 plus the 30 in all our towns, in all our villages, in all our cities. The community that we'll be raising, the believing people that we will be raising in this nation. I mean, that's the living church, and that's what we need to be. Let's open our doors.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Regan, for joining us and sharing both about your Pregnancy Helpline and your own church ministry as well. Really appreciate that. Thank you for joining us on Facebook and YouTube. And do follow us, subscribe to our emails, connect with us on the various social media. And we will be back again this time next week on a different topic. So thank you for joining us, and see you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you.